I turned my key in the front door lock, exhausted after a 12-hour shift at the hospital, expecting to collapse on my couch with leftover takeout. Instead, I walked into my living room to find my sister Jessica cooking dinner in my kitchen while her twin boys played video games on a television I definitely did not own. Her husband, Brandon, was assembling a crib in what used to be my home office. Jessica looked up from stirring pasta sauce and smiled, like this was the most natural thing in the world. "Hey, Claudette, Mom and Dad told us you were okay with us staying here until we get back on our feet. Thanks for being so generous, sis." I stood there holding my keys, my mouth hanging open like I was catching flies. The smell of garlic and tomatoes filled the air, and somewhere in the back of my mind, I registered that Jessica was using my grandmother's recipe. But mostly, I was trying to process how my sister's entire family had moved into the house I had bought 3 months ago without telling a single soul. Let me back up. 3 months earlier, I had been living in a cramped studio apartment, saving every penny I could squeeze from my nursing salary. At 28 years old, I was tired of throwing money away on rent, tired of thin walls and noisy neighbors, and most of all, tired of my parents, Robert and Linda, treating me like I was still 16 and incapable of making my own decisions. My parents had always been what you might charitably call involved in my life. When I was 22 and wanted to buy my first car, my father insisted on coming with me to the dealership and negotiating the entire deal himself. When I was 25 and got promoted to charge nurse, my mother called my supervisor to thank her personally, as if I were a child receiving a gold star. They meant well, or at least I kept telling myself they did, but their version of love felt like being slowly suffocated by a well-meaning python. So when I started house hunting, I made the decision to keep it completely secret. I spent my days off driving through neighborhoods, attending open houses, and meeting with real estate agents who knew me only as Claudette Morrison, first-time homebuyer, not as Robert and Linda Peterson's daughter, who clearly needed parental supervision for every major life decision. The process took 4 months. 4 months of researching mortgage rates, comparing insurance policies, and learning about home inspections. 4 months of feeling like a real adult for the first time in my life. When I finally found the perfect house, a 3-bedroom ranch in a quiet neighborhood with mature oak trees and a fenced backyard, I felt like I was claiming my independence in the most fundamental way possible. The house was everything I had dreamed of. Built in 1975, it had original hardwood floors that gleamed when the afternoon sun streamed through the bay window in the living room. The kitchen was small but functional, with enough counter space for my coffee maker and the stand mixer I planned to finally take out of its box. There was even a little reading nook under the stairs, where I pictured myself spending Sunday mornings with coffee and whatever novel I was working through. I qualified for the mortgage on my own, which felt like the most empowering moment of my adult life. My credit score was excellent, my debt-to-income ratio was solid, and I had saved enough for a 20% down payment. The closing went smoothly, and I walked out of the title company with keys to my very own home. For the first 2 months, I lived in blissful secrecy. I told my parents I was renting a new place closer to the hospital, which was technically true since my commute was shorter. I furnished the house slowly, buying pieces I actually liked, instead of accepting the hand-me-downs my mother was always trying to give me. I planted flowers in the front yard and learned how to use a lawnmower. I hosted my first dinner party for friends from work, and nobody asked me if I had checked with my parents first. But standing in my living room watching my nephew Cole attempt to jump over the coffee table I had spent 3 weeks shopping for, I realized my secret was very much blown. "Jessica," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "what exactly did Mom and Dad tell you?" She turned down the heat under the sauce and wiped her hands on a dish towel that definitely belonged to her, not me. "They said you bought this house specifically to help family members who were going through tough times. Mom showed me all the texts you sent about how you wanted us to move in and get back on our feet here. She said you were too embarrassed to ask us directly, so you asked her to handle the logistics." My blood pressure spiked so fast, I could hear it rushing in my ears. What texts? Jessica pulled out her phone and showed me a string of messages that appeared to come from my number. Messages about how excited I was to help her family. Messages about room arrangements and move-in schedules. Messages that I had absolutely never sent. The last message was time-stamped from 2 weeks ago. Jessica, I'm so glad you and Brandon and the boys are moving in next weekend. I've been looking forward to this for months. Having family close will make the house feel like a real home. I stared at the phone screen, reading words I had never written in a voice that sounded nothing like mine, and felt the foundation of my carefully constructed adult life crumbling beneath my feet. I barely slept that night. After explaining to Jessica that there had been some kind of massive misunderstanding, I convinced her family to stay in a hotel until we could sort things out. Brandon grumbled about the expense, but Jessica could see the genuine confusion in my eyes and agreed to give me 24 hours to figure out what had gone wrong. The next morning, I marched into my parents' house without calling first, something I had not done since I was a teenager, sneaking back in after curfew. My mother Linda was in the kitchen, making her famous blueberry pancakes, the same breakfast she had made every Saturday for as long as I could remember. My father Robert sat at the dining table reading the newspaper, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose exactly like they had been every morning of my childhood. For a moment, looking at this picture of domestic normalcy, I almost convinced myself that I had imagined the entire previous evening. Maybe there really had been a misunderstanding. Maybe somehow my parents had gotten confused about my intentions. Claudette! Linda turned from the stove with a bright smile. How wonderful that you stopped by. I was just thinking about you. How are you enjoying having Jessica's family in your new place? And there it was. No confusion. No misunderstanding. My parents knew exactly what they had done. Mom, I said, hanging my purse carefully on the back of a chair. I never told Jessica she could move into my house. I never sent those text messages. And I never asked you to handle any logistics for me. Robert folded his newspaper with the deliberate precision he used for everything, from hanging pictures to carving the Thanksgiving turkey. Claudette, sweetheart, I think you might be confused. You were so excited about helping your sister when you told us about the house. I never told you about the house. Of course you did. Linda flipped a pancake and gestured with her spatula. Remember? It was about 6 weeks ago. You came over for dinner and told us all about your new mortgage and how you wanted to use the extra space to help family members in need. I felt like I was losing my mind. I have never had dinner here in the last 6 weeks. I specifically did not tell you about the house because I knew you would try to control the situation. My parents exchanged one of their meaningful looks, the kind they had been sharing over my head my entire life, the kind that said, "Our daughter is being difficult again." Claudette, my father said in his patient, explaining things to a child voice. Your mother's friend Martha from the bank called us when your mortgage application went through. Martha was concerned because the financial commitment seemed quite large for someone your age, and she thought we should know about it. The bottom dropped out of my stomach. Martha called you about my private financial information? She was looking out for you, sweetheart, Linda said. She and I have been friends since high school. She knows how much we care about you. When she saw the paperwork come through, she was worried you were getting in over your head. That is a federal crime, Mom. Bank employees cannot share customer information with unauthorized parties, even family members. Robert waved his hand dismissively. Martha was being responsible. And once we knew about the house, we realized what a perfect opportunity this was for Jessica's family. They lost their apartment when Brandon got laid off, and they have been staying in that awful extended stay motel. Family helps family, Claudette, but I never agreed to help them by giving them my house. You did not need to agree, Linda said, as if this were the most obvious thing in the world. This is what family does. Jessica needs the help more than you need a whole house to yourself. I stared at my parents. These people who had raised me and fed me and driven me to soccer practice and helped me with homework, and realized that they genuinely believed they had the right to make major life decisions for me without my consent. How did you get keys to my house? Oh, that was easy, Linda said brightly. Remember 2 weeks ago when you came over for Sunday dinner? I borrowed your keys while you were helping me with the dishes, and had copies made at the hardware store down the street. I remembered that dinner. I remembered hanging my purse in the front hall closet like always. I remembered helping clean up afterward, chatting about my work schedule while loading the dishwasher. I had no idea my mother was systematically violating my privacy and planning to hand my house over to my sister. And how exactly did you convince Jessica that I wanted her to move in? That was simple too, Robert said. We have been texting her from your phone number for weeks, working out all the details. From my phone number? Linda opened a kitchen drawer and pulled out a piece of paper covered with her handwriting. Martha helped us set up one of those internet texting services using your number. All we needed was some basic information about your phone plan, which Martha was able to provide. I looked at the paper and saw what appeared to be a detailed plan for moving Jessica's family into my house. Room assignments, utility transfers, even a schedule for who would handle grocery shopping. My parents had orchestrated an elaborate fraud to steal my house and give it to my sister, and they were telling me about it as casually as they might describe planning a family barbecue. This is insane, I said. This is fraud and identity theft and probably a dozen other felonies. Claudette Marie Peterson, my mother said, using my full name like she had when I was 8 years old and had broken her favorite vase. You are being very dramatic. This is family business, not criminal activity. That was when I noticed the folder on the kitchen counter. A thick manila folder with my name written on it in Robert's careful block letters. What is that? Oh, that is just some paperwork Martha helped us put together, Linda said. Legal documents to make sure everything is handled properly. I opened the folder and felt the world spin around me. Inside were copies of my birth certificate, my social security card, my nursing license, my mortgage paperwork, and documents I had never seen before. Documents that appeared to be power of attorney forms and financial guardianship petitions. At the bottom of the stack was a letter from something called Mercy General Psychiatric Evaluation Services, stating that I had been diagnosed with severe mental health issues that impaired my ability to make rational financial decisions. I had never been to Mercy General Psychiatric Evaluation Services. I had never been diagnosed with mental health issues of any kind. What is this? Well, Robert said, clearing his throat, Martha thought it might be helpful to have some legal protections in place. You know, given your history of impulsive decisions and emotional instability. What history of impulsive decisions? What emotional instability? Remember 2 years ago when you had that appendicitis surgery? Linda said. You signed those power of attorney documents so we could handle your affairs while you were recovering. We thought it might be good to update those, just to make sure everything is legally proper. I remembered signing those documents. I had been in severe pain and facing emergency surgery, and my parents had convinced me that someone needed to have legal authority to handle my insurance claims and medical decisions if something went wrong. I had signed the papers thinking I was being responsible. I had no idea those documents were still in effect. I had no idea my parents could use them to petition for control over my finances. You forged psychiatric evaluations. We did not forge anything, Robert said firmly. We consulted with professionals about your recent behavior patterns and got their expert opinions. What recent behavior patterns? Buying a house without consulting family, Linda counted on her fingers, keeping major financial decisions secret, becoming hostile when we try to offer guidance. These are all signs of concerning changes in judgment. I stood in my childhood kitchen, surrounded by the same yellow wallpaper and apple-themed decorations my mother had loved for 20 years, and realized that my parents were not just controlling. They were not just overbearing. They were systematically working to have me declared mentally incompetent so they could take legal control of my assets and give my house to my sister. And according to the papers in the folder, the guardianship hearing was scheduled for next week. I left my parents' house feeling like I was walking through a nightmare that kept getting worse every time I thought I understood the scope of it. By 9 o'clock Monday morning, I was sitting in the parking lot of First National Bank, waiting for them to open so I could talk to someone about what Martha had done. The bank manager, a professional woman named Carol, who looked like she had dealt with her fair share of family financial drama, listened to my story with increasingly raised eyebrows. "Miss Peterson," she said, pulling up my account information on her computer, "I need to tell you that we take customer privacy very seriously here. If what you are describing actually happened, it represents multiple federal violations." It definitely happened. My parents told me exactly what Martha did. Carol's fingers clicked across her keyboard. "I am looking at your account history, and I do see some unusual inquiry activity over the past 2 months. Someone has been accessing your credit reports and mortgage information regularly. Can you tell me exactly what was accessed?" "Let me pull up the detailed logs." Carol's expression grew more serious as she scrolled through screens of data. "Miss Peterson, someone with Martha's employee credentials has viewed your account information 23 times since your mortgage was approved. They have accessed your employment records, your credit history, your account balances, and your transaction history." My stomach dropped. 23 times? And that is just the electronic access. There have also been several phone inquiries from people claiming to be you, asking about adding authorized users to your accounts and getting copies of various financial documents. I never made any phone calls like that. Carol made notes in what appeared to be an incident report. "Miss Peterson, I need to ask you directly. Have you given anyone permission to access your financial information or make inquiries on your behalf?" "Absolutely not. I have been extremely careful to keep all of this private." "In that case, we have a serious problem." Carol picked up her phone and dialed an extension. "I need to speak with our security department immediately, and we will need to contact federal regulators about potential privacy violations." While Carol talked to security, I tried to process the scope of what had been done to me. My parents had not just borrowed my keys and made copies. They had been systematically monitoring my finances for months, gathering information they could use to build a case that I was financially irresponsible. Carol hung up the phone and turned back to me. "Miss Peterson, our security director is going to want to speak with you, and we will need to file formal reports with several agencies. But first, I need to show you something that I think you should know about." She turned her computer screen toward me. "These are inquiries that have been made about your mortgage account in the past week. Someone has been asking detailed questions about the process for adding co-borrowers to existing mortgages." Co-borrowers? Someone has been researching how to add additional names to your mortgage and property deed. They have been asking about the documentation required and the legal process involved. Can someone actually do that without my permission? Not legally, no. But there are ways to manipulate the system, especially if someone has access to your personal information and forged documents. Carol pulled out a file folder that looked disturbingly familiar. "Miss Peterson, someone submitted an application last week to add Robert and Linda Peterson as co-borrowers on your mortgage. The application included power of attorney documents and medical records, indicating that you have given them authority to make financial decisions on your behalf." I felt like I was going to throw up. I never gave anyone that authority. The power of attorney documents appear to be legitimate, and they are dated from 2 years ago. Those were for medical decisions during my surgery. They were supposed to be temporary. Unfortunately, the documents as written give quite broad authority over your financial affairs, and they do not appear to have an expiration date. Carol handed me copies of the paperwork. "Miss Peterson, if these documents are valid, your parents may already have legal authority to make changes to your mortgage and property ownership." I stared at the papers, recognizing my own signature on documents I had signed while in pain and terrified about emergency surgery. My parents had convinced me I was being responsible and preparing for the worst-case scenario. Instead, I had been signing away my financial independence. "There is something else," Carol said gently. "The medical records submitted with this application indicate that you have been diagnosed with severe anxiety, depression, and impaired decision-making capacity. The record suggests that you are not competent to manage significant financial decisions without supervision. Those medical records are fake. I have never been treated for any mental health conditions. The records appear to come from Mercy General Psychiatric Evaluation Services, and they look professionally prepared. I have never been to that facility. I have never even heard of it. Carol made more notes. Miss Peterson, I think you may be dealing with identity theft and financial fraud on a much larger scale than you initially realized. Someone has gone to considerable effort to build a false medical and psychological profile that would support claims that you need financial supervision. What does that mean for my house? If the power of attorney documents are upheld, and the medical records are accepted as valid, your parents could potentially gain legal authority over your property. They could add themselves to the deed, transfer ownership, or even sell the house without your consent. I sat in that banker's office, surrounded by evidence that my parents had been systematically undermining my independence for months, and realized that Jessica moving into my house was just the beginning. My parents were not trying to help family members in need. They were trying to steal everything I had worked for. Carol, I said, what do I need to do to stop this? You need a lawyer, Miss Peterson. And you need one immediately. As I walked out of the bank, my phone buzzed with a text message from my mother. Claudette, sweetheart, the guardianship hearing is scheduled for Thursday at 10 a.m. We thought you should know so you can plan to attend. We love you and just want what is best for you. They were not even pretending anymore that this was about helping Jessica. This was about taking control of my life, my money, and my future. And they had been planning it for much longer than I had realized. Finding a lawyer turned out to be more complicated than I expected. The first 3 attorneys I called said they were too busy to take on a new case. The fourth one listened to my story for about 10 minutes before telling me that family disputes were too emotionally complex for his practice. The fifth lawyer said that if my parents already had valid power of attorney documents, there might not be much I could do. By Wednesday afternoon, with my guardianship hearing scheduled for the next morning, I was starting to panic. I called in sick to work, something I had not done in over 2 years, and spent the day desperately trying to find legal representation. That was when my phone started ringing with calls from people I had not heard from in months. My Aunt Patricia called to tell me how disappointed she was in my selfishness toward Jessica's family. My cousin Michael called to ask if I was having some kind of breakdown. My childhood neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, called to say she was praying for my emotional healing. Every conversation followed the same pattern. Someone would express concern about my mental state, mention that they had been talking to my parents about my recent problems, and suggest that maybe accepting help with my finances would be the best thing for everyone. By the 4th call, I realized what was happening. My parents were not just building a legal case against me. They were systematically destroying my reputation and credibility with everyone who knew me. They were creating a narrative in which I was unstable, irrational, and in need of family intervention. The phone calls were working. Even people who had known me my entire life were starting to believe that I might be having mental health issues. After all, why would my parents lie about something like that? Wednesday evening, I drove by my house to see how Jessica's family was settling in. What I found made me realize that this situation was escalating beyond anything I had imagined. Brandon's pickup truck was in my driveway, along with a van from Peterson Construction Company. The front yard was torn up, and there were building materials stacked on what used to be my flower garden. Through the front window, I could see that the walls between the living room and kitchen had been partially demolished. I sat in my car, staring at my house being literally torn apart, and called Jessica. "Claudette," she answered on the first ring. "I am so glad you called. Brandon has been working on those renovations you discussed. The open concept design is going to look amazing." "Jessica, I never discussed any renovations with Brandon." "Of course you did. Mom showed us all the plans you drew up. Brandon thinks he can have the main living area finished by the weekend, and then we can start on the master bedroom addition. The what? The master bedroom addition. For when Mom and Dad move in to help supervise things, did not they tell you? They are planning to sell their house and move in here permanently so they can make sure everyone has the support they need. I felt like I had been hit by a truck. Jessica, Mom, and Dad are planning to move into my house? Well, it is going to be the family house now, right? That is what this whole thing is about. Creating a space where the whole family can be together and support each other. I hung up and called my parents immediately. "Oh, good, you called," my mother said without even saying hello. "We have been meaning to talk to you about the living arrangements. Once the guardianship is finalized, we think it would be best if we all live together. That way we can make sure you get the support and supervision you need while Jessica's family gets back on their feet. You are planning to move into my house? It is going to be the family house, sweetheart. We have already talked to a real estate agent about selling our place. The equity from our house should cover most of the renovation costs to make your house work for everyone. And what happens to me in this arrangement? You will live there too, of course. We thought you could have the basement bedroom since you will not need as much space and it will give you some privacy while you are working on your emotional issues. I was going to live in the basement of my own house while my parents took over the master bedroom and my sister's family lived in the rest of the space. This was not about helping Jessica or supporting family members in need. This was about my parents taking control of everything I owned and reducing me to a tenant in my own home. Mom, this is insane. You cannot just take my house. We are not taking anything, Claudette. We are creating a family support system. After the hearing tomorrow, you will understand that this is all for your own good. Thursday morning, I woke up in my tiny studio apartment, the same apartment I had been so eager to leave 3 months ago. I put on my best professional outfit and drove to the courthouse, still without a lawyer, still trying to figure out how to defend myself against parents who had been planning this for months. The hearing was in a small courtroom that smelled like old wood and industrial cleaning supplies. My parents sat at a table with an attorney I had never seen before, looking serious and concerned. They had stacks of paperwork, medical files, and what appeared to be character witness statements. I sat alone at the defendant's table, holding a folder containing my own bank records and the notes I had taken during my conversations with Carol at the bank. The judge was a middle-aged woman who looked like she had been handling family court cases for decades. She reviewed my parents' petition with the same expression my pediatrician used to have when examining my throat for strep. "Mr. and Mrs. Peterson," the judge said, "you are requesting guardianship over your 28-year-old daughter on the grounds that she is mentally incompetent to handle her financial affairs. That is a serious legal action that requires substantial evidence." My parents' lawyer stood up. "Your Honor, we have extensive documentation of Miss Peterson's declining mental state and increasingly irrational behavior. She has been making major financial decisions without consulting family, has become hostile and paranoid when offered support, and recently purchased a house that is well beyond her financial capacity to maintain." "Your Honor," I said, standing up because I had no idea what else to do, "I am a registered nurse with an excellent credit score and a stable income. I purchased a house that I can easily afford, and I have never been diagnosed with any mental health conditions." "Miss Peterson," the judge said, "do you have legal representation?" "No, Your Honor. I was unable to find an attorney on short notice." The judge looked at my parents' lawyer. "Mr. Collins, please present your evidence." For the next hour, I listened to a carefully constructed case designed to make me sound like someone who needed constant supervision. My parents had medical reports stating that I showed signs of paranoid delusions and impaired judgment. They had statements from family members expressing concern about my recent erratic behavior. They had financial records showing that I had made a large purchase without consulting anyone. Every piece of evidence was technically true but completely twisted. Yes, I had bought a house without consulting family. No, that was not a sign of mental illness. Yes, I had become defensive when my parents tried to offer guidance. No, that did not mean I was paranoid. But as I listened to the case against me, I realized how convincing it sounded. If I did not know the real story, I might have believed it myself. When it was my turn to respond, I tried to explain what had actually happened. I told the judge about Martha illegally accessing my financial information, about my parents copying my keys and forging text messages, about the fake medical records and the systematic invasion of my privacy. I could see the judge becoming more skeptical with every word I said. My story sounded paranoid and irrational, exactly like someone who needed family supervision might sound. "Miss Peterson," the judge said when I finished, "do you have any evidence to support these claims about forged documents and illegal bank access?" I handed over my folder with the notes from my conversation with Carol and the bank records showing unusual inquiry activity. It looked pathetically thin compared to the stacks of official-looking documents my parents had presented. The judge reviewed my evidence for about 5 minutes, then looked back at me. "Miss Peterson, the power of attorney documents you signed 2 years ago do appear to give your parents broad authority over your financial affairs. The medical records indicate a pattern of concerning behavior that began shortly after you took on significant new debt. Given the evidence presented, I am inclined to grant temporary guardianship to your parents, pending further psychological evaluation." "Your Honor," I said, feeling desperate, "those medical records are fake. I have never been treated by any mental health professional." "Miss Peterson, that statement itself is concerning. Denial of mental health issues is often a symptom of the underlying condition. I realized that anything I said to defend myself would be twisted into evidence that I needed help. The system was designed to protect vulnerable adults from financial exploitation. But my parents had figured out how to use that system to exploit me. However," the judge continued, "I am troubled by some of the allegations Miss Peterson has made about bank privacy violations and forged documents. Before I make a final ruling, I am going to order an independent investigation into the financial irregularities she has described." My parents' lawyer started to object, but the judge held up her hand. "I am postponing this hearing for 2 weeks to allow for a proper investigation of all claims. In the meantime, the existing power of attorney documents remain in effect, but no major financial decisions can be made without court approval." It was not the victory I had hoped for, but it was not the complete defeat I had feared. I had 2 weeks to prove that my parents were criminals, not caregivers. As I walked out of the courthouse, my father caught up with me in the parking lot. "Claudette," he said, "this does not have to be adversarial. We are family. We love you. We just want to help you before you make mistakes that could ruin your future." "Dad, you have been committing federal crimes to steal my house. We have been protecting you from your own poor judgment. There is a difference." I looked at my father, this man who had taught me to ride a bicycle and helped me with algebra homework, and walked me down the aisle at my college graduation, and realized that he genuinely believed what he was saying. In his mind, he was saving me from myself. The fact that he was destroying my life in the process was just collateral damage in service of a greater good. "Dad, what happens if I prove that you and Mom have been lying about everything?" He smiled sadly, the same expression he had worn when I was 12, and told him I did not believe in Santa Claus anymore. "Sweetheart, that is never going to happen. No one is going to believe that your mother and I would go to this much trouble unless we genuinely thought you needed help." As he walked away, I realized he was probably right. My parents had been building this case for months, maybe years. They had documentation, witness statements, and the credibility that came with being concerned parents trying to help their troubled daughter. All I had was the truth, and I was beginning to understand that in family court the truth was not always enough. I spent Thursday night in my studio apartment, staring at the ceiling, and trying to figure out how to prove that my own parents were systematically committing fraud against me. Every piece of evidence they had was either forged, obtained illegally, or taken completely out of context. But proving that was going to require resources and legal expertise that I did not have. Friday morning, I called in sick to work again and drove to the university campus where I had gone to nursing school. My former roommate, Sarah Chen, had graduated from law school the year before and was working at a firm that specialized in elder abuse cases. It was a long shot, but Sarah was the only lawyer I knew personally, and I was running out of options. Sarah's office was in a modern building downtown, all glass and steel and the kind of expensive-looking furniture that suggested her firm was doing well. When I walked into her office, she took one look at my face and immediately canceled her next meeting. "Claudette, you look terrible. What is going on?" I told her everything. The house purchase, the secret surveillance of my finances, the forged text messages, the fake medical records, and the guardianship hearing. Sarah listened without interrupting, taking notes in the same careful handwriting I remembered from our study sessions. When I finished, Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "Claudette," she said finally, "what you are describing is not just family dysfunction. This is organized financial abuse. Your parents have committed multiple federal crimes, and they have done it systematically over a period of months. Can you help me? I can try. But I have to warn you that these cases are extremely difficult to win. Family courts are designed to err on the side of caution when it comes to protecting vulnerable adults. If your parents have convinced a judge that you need supervision, proving otherwise is going to require overwhelming evidence of their fraud." Sarah pulled out a legal pad and started writing. "We need to document everything. Every illegal bank access, every forged document, every privacy violation. We need to build a timeline that shows this was a coordinated campaign, not concerned parents responding to genuine problems. How do we do that? We start with the bank records. If Martha illegally accessed your accounts 23 times, there will be electronic logs of every single access. Banks keep detailed records of who looks at what and when. We can use that to show a pattern of unauthorized surveillance that began long before your parents claimed to be worried about your mental state." For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of hope. "We also need to investigate this Mercy General Psychiatric Evaluation Services," Sarah continued. "If they produced fake medical records, there will be evidence of that fraud. Licensing boards take that kind of thing very seriously." Sarah picked up her phone and dialed an extension. "I am calling our private investigator. If your parents have done this before, he will find evidence of it." "What do you mean, done this before?" "Financial predators rarely limit themselves to one victim, Claudette. If your parents are sophisticated enough to orchestrate this level of fraud against you, they have probably been practicing on someone else first." The private investigator, a former police detective named Marcus Williams, met us at Sarah's office that afternoon. He was a quiet man with gray hair and the kind of steady, methodical manner that suggested he had spent years dealing with complicated family crimes. "Miss Peterson," he said after reviewing my story, "I have seen cases like this before. Adult children who systematically exploit their aging parents usually. But the tactics are the same. Isolation, financial surveillance, manufactured crises that justify intervention. My parents are not aging or vulnerable," I said. "They are in their 50s and perfectly competent." "I understand that. But the methods they are using suggest experience with this kind of manipulation. People do not just wake up one day knowing how to forge medical records and manipulate banking systems. They learn these techniques somewhere." Marcus pulled out a tablet and started taking notes. "I'm going to research your parents' financial history, starting with their own parents. If they have done this before, there will be paper trails." "What kind of paper trails?" "Property transfers that happened shortly before an elderly relative died. Power of attorney documents that were used to move assets around. Medical records that justified financial intervention." Marcus looked up from his tablet. "Miss Peterson, do you know how your parents purchased their current house?" "They bought it about 5 years ago. They said they had been saving for years to upgrade from their starter home." "And did they explain where the money for the down payment came from?" I thought back to conversations around that time. My parents had been vague about their finances, the way they always were. They had mentioned something about a inheritance, but they had not provided details. They said something about an inheritance from my grandfather. When did your grandfather die? About 6 years ago. He had been living in a nursing home for the last 2 years of his life because of his dementia. Marcus and Sarah exchanged a look that suggested this information was significant. Miss Peterson, Sarah said carefully, did your parents handle your grandfather's financial affairs during his final illness? I think so. He could not manage his own finances anymore because of the dementia, so my parents helped him. We need to investigate that situation, Marcus said. If your parents used your grandfather's assets to purchase their current house, and if they did so without proper legal authority, that would establish a pattern of financial abuse that preceded their actions against you. Over the next week, while I waited for the follow-up guardianship hearing, Marcus investigated my family's financial history with a kind of thoroughness that made me understand why Sarah's firm kept him on retainer. What he found was disturbing enough that Sarah requested an emergency meeting. Claudette, she said, spreading documents across the conference table in her office, your parents did not just steal your grandfather's money. They systematically drained his accounts over a 2-year period while he was living in the nursing home. Marcus handed me copies of bank records that showed a pattern of large withdrawals from my grandfather's accounts, all authorized by power of attorney documents that my parents had convinced him to sign during the early stages of his dementia. Your grandfather had over $300,000 in savings and investments when he was diagnosed with dementia, Marcus explained. By the time he died, his accounts had been reduced to about $15,000. But nursing homes are expensive, I said. Maybe that money went to his care. His nursing home was paid for by Medicare and his pension, Sarah said. The money your parents took was in addition to his regular care expenses. Marcus pulled out more documents. They used your grandfather's assets to pay off their existing mortgage, purchase their current house, and fund what appears to have been a very comfortable lifestyle for several years. But that is stealing. Yes, Sarah said. It is. And more importantly for your case, it establishes that your parents are experienced at using legal documents and manufactured medical crises to gain control of family members' finances. I stared at the evidence of my parents' previous crimes and suddenly understood that everything they had done to me was part of a pattern that had been going on for years. There is more, Marcus said. I found records indicating that your parents attempted to gain guardianship over your grandfather shortly before his death, claiming that his existing power of attorney documents were not sufficient for his complex medical needs. What happened with that? Your grandfather died before the guardianship hearing took place, but the paperwork shows that your parents were planning to gain complete legal control over his remaining assets. Sarah pulled out a file folder that looked similar to the one my parents had shown me in their kitchen. Claudette, the guardianship petition your parents filed against you is almost identical to the one they filed against your grandfather. Same legal arguments, same medical claims, same justifications for family intervention. They're using the same playbook. Exactly. And that means we can predict their next moves and prepare counter-arguments. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I might actually have a chance to win. But Marcus had one more piece of information that changed everything. Miss Peterson, there is something else you need to know. Your parents have been in contact with a real estate investor who specializes in purchasing houses from families dealing with financial crises. What kind of investor? The kind who pays cash for houses that are being sold quickly, usually for significantly less than market value. Marcus handed me a business card. Your parents have been discussing the sale of your house with this investor for 3 weeks. I looked at the business card for Premium Property Solutions and realized that my parents were not planning to live in my house long term. They were planning to sell it and pocket the money, just like they had done with my grandfather's assets. How long do we have? If the guardianship is granted at the next hearing, they could have your house sold within a month, Sarah said. We need to prove their fraud before that happens, or you will lose everything. The night before the second guardianship hearing, I made a decision that Sarah advised against, but that I knew I had to make. I called Jessica and asked her to meet me for coffee. My sister looked exhausted when she walked into the diner near her hotel. Brandon had been working construction jobs during the day and renovating my house in the evenings, and Jessica had been managing the boys and trying to figure out their long-term housing situation. "Claudette, I am so glad you called," she said, sliding into the booth across from me. "This whole situation has been so stressful. I know you are going through a difficult time, but I want you to know that we appreciate everything you are doing to help us." I pulled out copies of the documents Marcus had found and spread them across the table. "Jessica, I need you to look at something." For the next hour, I walked my sister through the evidence of our parents' systematic financial abuse. The illegal bank surveillance, the forged medical records, the theft of our grandfather's assets, and the plan to sell my house to Premium Property Solutions. Jessica's face went through a series of emotions as she processed the information. Confusion, disbelief, anger, and finally, a kind of sick understanding. "Claudette, this cannot be true. Mom and Dad would not do this. Look at the bank records, Jessica. Look at the dates. They have been planning this for months." Jessica picked up the paperwork showing the withdrawals from our grandfather's accounts. But Grandpa needed care. This money went to his medical expenses. His medical expenses were covered by insurance. Mom and Dad used his money to buy their house. I watched my sister's face as she realized that our parents had been lying to our entire family for years. Everything they had told us about Grandpa's finances, everything they had said about their own success and financial stability, had been built on theft and fraud. "Jessica, they are planning to do the same thing to me that they did to Grandpa, and they are using your family as justification for it." "What do you mean?" "They convinced you to move into my house so they could claim I was being generous and helping family. Then they used that as evidence that I make impulsive financial decisions. Your housing crisis gave them the perfect cover story for taking control of my assets." Jessica was quiet for a long time, staring at the documents spread across the table. "Claudette, if this is all true, then Brandon and I have been helping them commit crimes against you. You did not know. They manipulated you just like they manipulated me. But we should have questioned it. When Mom showed us those text messages supposedly from you, I should have called you directly to confirm. When she had keys to your house, I should have wondered how she got them. When Brandon started tearing down walls based on renovation plans that supposedly came from you, I should have insisted on seeing the actual plans." Jessica started crying, and I realized that my sister was not just upset about being deceived. She was ashamed of how easily she had been manipulated into participating in the destruction of my life. "Jessica, I need you to help me stop them." "What do you mean?" "I need you to testify at the hearing tomorrow. I need you to tell the judge that you never received any text messages directly from me, that you never spoke to me about moving into my house, and that all your information came through our parents. But if I do that, they will know that I know about their lies." "Yes. And they will probably turn on you the same way they turned on me once they realized I was not going to cooperate." Jessica wiped her eyes and looked at me seriously. "Claudette, if Mom and Dad have been stealing money for years, what happens to them if we expose this?" "They go to prison. Federal charges for bank fraud, identity theft, and elder abuse. State charges for forgery and theft. They are looking at serious jail time." "And what happens to Brandon and me? We have been living in a house that does not belong to us, making modifications based on forged documents. Are we criminals too?" "Sarah says that you and Brandon are victims, not criminals. You were manipulated into participating, but you did not know you were committing crimes." Jessica was quiet again, and I could see her struggling with the implications of everything I had told her. "Claudette, if I testify against Mom and Dad, our family will never recover from this. Our family is already destroyed, Jessica. Mom and Dad destroyed it when they decided to steal from their own children." The next morning, Jessica and Brandon were sitting in the courthouse waiting room when I arrived with Sarah. My parents were at their lawyer's table, confident and prepared. with even more documentation than they had brought to the first hearing. But this time, I was not alone. Sarah stood up when the judge called the case. Your Honor, we have new evidence of systematic fraud and financial abuse that directly contradicts the claims made by Mr. and Mrs. Peterson. My parents' lawyer immediately objected. Your Honor, Miss Peterson's family has already presented extensive evidence of her declining mental state and need for supervision. Additional allegations of fraud appear to be further evidence of her paranoid delusions. Your Honor, Sarah continued, we have bank records showing illegal access to Miss Peterson's financial information, documentation of forged medical reports, and evidence that Mr. and Mrs. Peterson have committed similar crimes against other family members. The judge looked intrigued. Please present your evidence, Counselor. For the next 2 hours, Sarah methodically dismantled every piece of my parents' case. She showed how Martha had violated federal banking regulations by sharing my private information. She demonstrated that the medical records from Mercy General Psychiatric Evaluation Services were fabricated because the facility did not actually exist. She proved that my parents had forged the text messages supposedly from me by showing that the messages were sent from an internet service that they had set up using illegally obtained information about my phone plan. But the most damaging evidence came when Jessica took the witness stand. My sister testified that she had never received any direct communication from me about moving into my house. She explained that all of her information had come through our parents, and that she had never spoken to me directly about the living arrangements. She told the judge about the renovation plans that supposedly came from me, but that she had never actually seen. Then Marcus presented the evidence of my parents' theft from our grandfather. Bank records, power of attorney documents, and a pattern of financial abuse that had been going on for years. I watched my parents' faces as the evidence mounted against them. My mother looked confused and hurt, as if she could not understand why her children were attacking her. My father looked angry and defiant, like he was being persecuted for trying to help his family. But their lawyer looked increasingly uncomfortable as Sarah presented evidence of criminal activity that went far beyond family disagreements. When Sarah finished, the judge was quiet for several minutes, reviewing the documents and evidence that covered her desk. Mr. and Mrs. Peterson, she said finally, the evidence presented today suggests that you have engaged in systematic financial fraud against multiple family members over a period of years. The medical records you submitted appear to be fabricated, the power of attorney documents appear to have been misused, and your access to Miss Peterson's financial information appears to have been obtained illegally. My parents' lawyer started to respond, but the judge held up her hand. Furthermore, the testimony from your other daughter directly contradicts your claims about Miss Peterson's supposedly impulsive decision to help family members. It appears that Miss Peterson never agreed to any of the arrangements you described. Your Honor, my father said, standing up, our daughter is clearly having mental health issues. This entire situation proves that she needs family supervision. Mr. Peterson, the only mental health issues I see in this courtroom are the delusional beliefs that led you to think you could commit federal crimes against your own daughter without consequences. The judge turned to me. Miss Peterson, I am dismissing the guardianship petition filed against you. The evidence clearly shows that you are a competent adult who has been the victim of financial abuse, not someone who needs supervision. I felt like I could breathe again for the first time in weeks. However, the judge continued. The evidence of criminal activity presented today requires additional action. I am ordering immediate criminal investigations into the bank fraud, identity theft, and elder abuse allegations. Mr. and Mrs. Peterson, you should expect to be contacted by federal and state investigators within the next few days. As we left the courthouse, my parents tried to approach me in the parking lot. Claudette, my mother said, you do not understand what you have done. We are your family. We were trying to help you. Mom, you were trying to steal my house and have me declared mentally incompetent. That is not helping. That is abuse. You have destroyed this family, my father said. I hope you are proud of yourself. I looked at my parents, these people who had raised me and loved me, and ultimately betrayed me in the most fundamental way possible. I did not destroy our family, Dad. You did. When you decided that stealing from me was acceptable as long as you convinced yourself it was for my own good. As they walked away, I realized that I felt sad but not guilty. I had not wanted to destroy my relationship with my parents, but I had not been willing to sacrifice my independence and my future to maintain their lies. Sometimes, protecting yourself requires courage that feels like cruelty to the people who have been controlling you. 6 months later, I was sitting in my kitchen drinking coffee and reading the newspaper when I saw the headline that I had been waiting for: Local couple sentenced in elder abuse case. Robert and Linda Peterson had been convicted on multiple federal charges, including bank fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes. They were sentenced to 4 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised probation and restitution of over $400,000 to the estate of my grandfather. Martha, the bank employee who had illegally accessed my accounts, had been fired and was facing federal charges of her own. First National Bank had settled with me out of court for an undisclosed amount that more than covered my legal expenses and the cost of repairing the damage Brandon had done to my house. The fake psychiatric facility that had produced my medical records turned out to be a document mill run by a man named Gerald Thompson, who specialized in providing fraudulent medical documentation for guardianship cases. He was facing federal charges in 17 states for similar schemes. I set down the newspaper and looked around my kitchen, which had been completely restored after Brandon's misguided renovation attempts. The walls were back where they belonged. The hardwood floors had been refinished, and my grandmother's dishes were back in their proper cabinets. Jessica and her family had moved into a small house across town with assistance from legitimate social services programs. It turned out that there were actually quite a few resources available for families dealing with temporary financial crises. Resources that did not require sacrificing someone else's independence or security. My relationship with Jessica had been rocky for a few months after the trial. She struggled with guilt about her role in my parents' scheme, even though she had been manipulated just as much as I had been. But eventually we worked through the complicated emotions of being sisters who had been turned against each other by people we trusted. Brandon had been the most difficult family member to forgive. While Jessica had been genuinely deceived by our parents' lies, Brandon had been more willingly ignorant about the situation. He had been so eager to solve his family's housing problems that he had not asked the questions he should have asked about whose house he was destroying and renovating. But people make mistakes when they are desperate, and desperate people are easy targets for manipulative relatives who offer simple solutions to complex problems. My parents had written me several letters from prison, alternating between apologies and justifications for their actions. The apology letters claimed that they had genuinely believed they were helping me and that their love had led them to make bad decisions. The justification letters explained that family members should support each other and that my refusal to help Jessica had forced them to take more drastic action. I had not responded to any of the letters. My relationship with my parents was probably beyond repair, and I was surprisingly okay with that. Some relationships are too toxic to maintain, even when they involve people who claim to love you. The most unexpected outcome of the entire situation was my friendship with Marcus Williams, the private investigator who had uncovered my parents' crimes. Marcus had spent 30 years as a police detective, dealing with family financial abuse cases, and he had offered to help me understand the warning signs of financial manipulation so I could protect myself in the future. Financial predators usually start small, he explained during one of our coffee meetings. They ask to borrow money, or they suggest joint bank accounts for convenience, or they offer to help with paperwork to make your life easier. By the time you realize what is happening, they have already gained access to your accounts and your personal information. How do you protect yourself from family members who are trying to help you? You establish boundaries, and you stick to them, even when people get angry about it. Real help does not require you to give up control of your finances or your legal rights. Real help does not require secrecy or forged documents or lies to other family members. Marcus had helped me set up new bank accounts with additional security measures, change all my passwords and personal identification numbers, and establish what he called financial barriers that would make it much harder for anyone to access my information or manipulate my accounts in the future. The most important thing to remember, he said, is that predators rely on your guilt and your sense of family obligation. They make you feel selfish for wanting to protect yourself. They make you feel like you are abandoning family members who need your help. But what if family members really do need help? Then you help them in ways that do not compromise your own security. You help them find legitimate resources and assistance programs. You offer support that does not require you to give up control of your own assets. Looking back on the entire experience, I realized that the most valuable lesson I learned was not about financial security or legal protection. It was about the difference between love and control. My parents had convinced themselves that controlling my life was an expression of their love for me. They genuinely believed that they knew what was best for me better than I knew myself, and they thought that justified taking away my autonomy and independence. But real love does not require control. Real love supports people in making their own decisions, even when those decisions are not what you would choose for them. Real love trusts people to learn from their own mistakes, rather than trying to prevent them from having the opportunity to make mistakes. I had spent my entire adult life trying to prove to my parents that I was capable and responsible and deserving of independence. But the truth was that I did not need to prove anything to anyone. Independence is not something you earn through good behavior. It is something you claim through the courage to set boundaries with people who want to control you. 6 months after the trial, Jessica called me with unexpected news. Claudette, I wanted to let you know that Brandon and I are getting divorced. I was surprised by how sad this made me feel. Despite everything that had happened, I had hoped that Jessica's marriage would survive the stress of our family crisis. I am sorry, Jessica. Are you okay? I am actually better than I have been in years, she said. Going through this situation with Mom and Dad made me realize that I have been accepting manipulation and control in my marriage the same way I accepted it from our parents. What do you mean? Brandon was not just ignorant about the situation with your house, Claudette. He was willfully ignorant because the arrangement benefited him. Even after we found out the truth about what Mom and Dad had done, he kept trying to convince me that we should find a way to stay in your house because we had put work into it. I had not known that Brandon had continued to pressure Jessica about staying in my house even after learning about our parents' fraud. He kept saying that family should help family and that you could afford to be generous because you have a good job and no kids, Jessica continued. It took me a while to realize that he was using the same manipulative tactics that Mom and Dad had used. What are you going to do now? I am moving back to my hometown with the boys. I got a job at the elementary school there, and my friend Amy said we can stay with her family until I can afford my own place. That sounds like a good plan. Claudette, I want to ask you something. After everything that happened, do you think it is possible for us to have a real relationship? Not the kind of relationship we had when Mom and Dad were manipulating both of us, but a real sister relationship based on honesty and respect? I thought about that question for a long time. Jessica and I had been pitted against each other by our parents for most of our adult lives. They had used our love for each other as a weapon to control both of us. Jessica had been told that I was selfish and unsupportive when I would not let my parents manage my finances. I had been told that Jessica was irresponsible and needy when she struggled with money. But the truth was that we were both just people trying to build good lives for ourselves and our families. We had different circumstances and different challenges, but we had never been enemies. We had been victims of the same manipulative parents who had taught us that love came with conditions and obligations. I think we can have a real relationship, Jessica, but it will have to be based on who we actually are, not who our parents told us we were. I would like that. 3 months later, I hosted my first family dinner in my restored kitchen. Jessica and the boys came, along with my friend Sarah and her husband David, and Marcus and his wife Ellen. We made tacos and played board games and talked about our jobs and our plans for the future. It was not the family dinner I had grown up with, where conversation was carefully monitored to avoid topics that might upset the delicate balance of control and obligation that held everyone together. It was better. It was a dinner with people who genuinely liked each other and wanted to spend time together, without any hidden agendas or manipulative undercurrents. As I watched Jessica help her boys with a puzzle while Sarah and Marcus debated the best strategies for preventing financial fraud, I realized that I had created something that my parents never understood how to create. I had built relationships based on mutual respect and genuine affection, rather than control and obligation. The most important lesson I learned from this entire experience is that protecting yourself from people who claim to love you is not selfish or cruel. It is necessary. Some people use love as an excuse to control others, and some families use loyalty as a weapon to prevent members from establishing healthy boundaries. Real love supports your independence and respects your autonomy. Real family celebrates your successes rather than trying to manage your failures. Real relationships are based on trust and honesty, not manipulation and control. It took me 28 years to learn that lesson, and it cost me my relationship with my parents, but it was worth it. Because for the first time in my adult life, I am free to make my own decisions, both good and bad, without having to justify them to people who think they know what is best for me better than I know myself. And that freedom, as scary and uncertain as it sometimes feels, is the foundation for building a life that actually belongs to you. As we finished dinner and Jessica helped me load the dishwasher, she said something that perfectly captured what we had both learned from our experience. You know what the strangest thing is, Claudette? I always thought that family meant never having to set boundaries with each other. But it turns out that real family means respecting the boundaries that people set. Looking back on everything that happened, I am grateful for the painful lesson that taught me the difference between love and control. I am grateful for the courage I found to fight back against people who claimed to be helping me. And I am grateful for the family I chose to build after I freed myself from the family that was trying to control me. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and the people around you is to refuse to accept love that comes with conditions. Sometimes protecting your independence requires you to disappoint people who have convinced themselves that they know what is best for you. But independence, once you claim it, is worth every difficult conversation and every burned bridge it costs you to achieve. I have learned that the price of freedom is sometimes the loss of relationships with people who are not capable of loving you without controlling you. And I have learned that this price, as painful as it is to pay, is always worth paying. Because at the end of the day, a life lived on your own terms, even with its mistakes and uncertainties, is infinitely better than a life lived according to someone else's idea of what is best for you. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members who claimed they were just trying to help you? How do you tell the difference between genuine support and manipulative control in your relationships? I would love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it encourages you to trust your instincts when something feels wrong in your family relationships, even when people tell you that you are being paranoid or ungrateful. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is protect yourself from people who claim to love you. Please like this video if my story resonated with you. Subscribe for more stories about finding strength in difficult family situations. And share this with anyone who might need to hear that they have the right to set boundaries with controlling family members. Your support means everything to me.